Welcome to the latest episode here of the Dan Time Podcast. I'm your host, Dan McArdle. I always approach this intro as if it is reaching a brand new listener. So for those of you who have been along for all 100 episodes thus far, maybe skip past, hit that 15-second skip, do that 2 or 3 times. But if this is your first time on the podcast, Dan Time is a journey across the Daniverse, as I call it. And it was my way to get a podcast going, to talk to interesting people out there. And I thought, what can I do that I don't think anybody else is already doing? And so I just didn't think there was already a Bob talking to Bob or Josh talking to Josh. So I thought, let's give it a shot. And then luckily, if you have the name Dan or Daniel, you realize pretty quickly that there's a lot of branches on that tree. So people either acquire nicknames like Danny, or of course, I've had Danielles and Danas and all sorts of great guests. So it has made for a very fun ride for me. I hope it has been for you as well. And my primary interests, as you've noticed, are sports, baseball specifically, and music. I'm wearing a shirt from one of the former guests on the show, a singer-songwriter from Australia, Dan Brody. So if you like discovering new music and you like baseball like I do, hopefully you found a show that it feels like it's tailor-made just for you. Anyway, with that being said, today's guest, this is really exciting, episode number 101. And I'm pleased to welcome who I consider, in my research, the authority on Montreal Expos baseball. If there is a peer in this realm, I'd like to know that person's name. And I'm sure Danny would be interested to know who that person is as well, because this is probably the most thorough research you're going to find, I would argue, on most Major League Baseball teams, past or present. Danny Gallagher, my guest today, has published, and please check me on this, 11 books on the Expos. The latest, and I'm pleased to have a copy with me here if you can see it. This is called Explosion, Genesis to Relocation, 1994 Saga, Contraction, Revelations about the Dying Days, Moises, Lenny, Schneids, and the Expos. This is the latest in a long series about the Expos. And no surprise, May 2026 or early spring, we'll call it, another book on the Expos, Willie Davis, The Tragedy of Willie Davis, and more Expos stories. And Danny has published hundreds of articles on the team. And I want to come out and say, because some of you may be hearing, okay, well, that's some good material on the Expos. Fans of baseball, and I would even say fans of sports, you're going to love these books. There are stories just in the 2024 book, Explosion, on Terry Francona, on Moises Alou, Gene Mauch. There is material in here that you have never heard before on any outlet. And it's a fascinating read. And it's a great book, as I believe some of the other ones are in the catalog, where you can sit down, maybe stick a bookmark in there, maybe not, flip it open, get to a random chapter and start reading and enjoying it. But Danny, I'm really rambling here. I'm great at doing that. Welcome to the show. Thanks for making time to be on Dan Time.
Yeah, Dan, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure. Always nice to talk about the Expos and baseball in general. It's been a passion of mine since 1988 as far as publishing, books, because that's the year I joined the staff of the Montreal Daily News covering the Expos. So ever since then, I've been, as you say, I've been writing hundreds of articles about the Expos and coming out with my 11th book in 2026 with special emphasis on Willie Davis.
There's a real fascination about the Montreal Expos that, please check me on this, Dan or Danny. If you look around, and people are familiar with teams that have been relocated over the years, markets that have lost teams. You've got, of course, the Brooklyn Dodgers, New York Giants. Those franchises moved west at the end of the 50s. But as we know, New York gains the Mets. Milwaukee loses the Braves to Atlanta. As we know, Milwaukee gains the Brewers later on. Baltimore loses the Orioles to Washington, but then they get the Orioles back. Seattle, the doomed pilot season, but give it a few years, they've got the Mariners. Washington loses the Senators, gets the Senators back, or the Nationals, by way of Montreal. Kansas City, the Athletics, moved to Oakland. Kansas City, of course, has the Royals now. You really have to go to, and we all know what's happened with Oakland and this limbo period in Sacramento for the A's. But you really have to go back to, in some cases, the 19th century. Indianapolis, Buffalo, Louisville. Danny, is there another municipality that in modern history that has lost a franchise and we just don't know if we're ever going to have another Major League ball club in that city again?
Well, it's possible, all this time, more than 10 years, 21 years that the Expos left for Washington. From 2004 to 2012, there really was no talk about anybody interested in promoting a new team in Montreal. And then in 2012, Warren Cromartie, the former Expo, started beating the drums, and he was meeting with some Major League Baseball officials, but really didn't have any money. Warren Cromartie has no money then, and he had no money now. But for many years, he was, a silent beat drummer, wanting the Expos back. And then a few years ago, Stephen Bronfman, the son of the former Expos owner, Charles Bronfman, showed a lot of interest in getting the team back in Montreal. But he was especially interested in the split season sister city concept with Tampa Bay, which really didn't work out. Because Stephen Bronfman did not have a lot of money compared to his father. So he has said that he did not have the financial resources to have what you call a full-time team, meaning 162 games. But he was interested in the Tampa concept where 41 games would be played in Montreal. And Tampa Bay supposedly would pay a lot of the expenses, and Bronfman's group would get some of the money for the Tampa Bay home games played in Montreal. And then, of course, as you know, that was turned down by Major League Baseball in January of 2022. So since then, it's been kind of bleak, and nobody has really showed any interest.
When I heard about that concept, I thought that there's, just call it, some psychological problems with that. If you live in Montreal or you live in Tampa Bay, and it's like, okay, half this team is mine, half of it belongs to this other city. It's psychologically, I just don't feel like it works for the fan. You don't feel like you're the same, it's your same ball club as a Texas Rangers fan or Pittsburgh Pirates fan. They don't have to share it with anybody. So that was my thought, my first reaction to that.
For sure. I don't know what the fan reaction would have been. Let's say if that was pulled off, how the Montreal fans would react to it, to a team that was not based in, not called the Montreal Expos, called Tampa Bay X-rays or whatever you want to call them. And but it was Stephen Bronfman's idea of getting baseball at least back into Montreal in some form or concept, and that later on possibly, a full-time team would come. But that was ideal for him because he just didn't have the money for a team playing 162 games. And, the Players Association didn't like that idea of the Rays playing games in Montreal. The Tampa Bay players would have had to get accommodation in Montreal while they already have an apartment or a house in Tampa Bay.
Sure. I do want to say, Danny, with these publications coming out, I think yearly for, up until 2024, I think you've released 5 books or a book every year for at least 5 or 6 years. This in tandem with the interest in the Montreal, I'm not wearing the cap, but the Montreal Expos memorabilia, the jerseys, the T-shirts, the hats, people are still buying these items. And everybody loves nostalgia. And you never know with the next generation, what they're driven by. But I feel like, and you probably agree, we're kind of sitting back in this lull period. We don't really see any action on the horizon, but it hasn't. I don't feel like that will ever completely vanish. This interest in the Montreal Expos in their certainly in their past, but kind of the what if? Can we make this work again? What's it going to take? Do we need to? Does the city need to finance a new baseball stadium and just say we'll build a stadium and we'll roll the dice and we'll try to? Has that ever been discussed, or do you think there's any conversations being had about really rolling the dice there and trying to finance a stadium and then seeing how the league will respond?
Yeah, you know what? The estimate of getting an expansion franchise is about 2.3 billion US or 3 billion Canadian, which is pretty high. And then to get a new stadium downtown Montreal would be, let's say, another billion Canadian. And as you know, Dan, the city of Montreal and the province of Quebec spent close to $1 billion recently, and I guess they're still renovating the roof and the perimeter of the roof at Olympic Stadium in the East End. So that was kind of like a signal saying that, okay, we're fixing up Olympic Stadium, but not for baseball. What they did was they redid the configuration of the Olympic Stadium field, but not for baseball. They made it more for football and soccer. But they told me that, let's say baseball, let's say the Blue Jays come back and they want to play another exhibition series one year, that they could change the field into baseball again. But it would require somebody with deep pockets then to get another franchise. It's Rob Manfred, the commissioner, said that he would like to expand in the final year of his year as a commissioner in 2029. So you're talking another 4 years. You never know if somebody might come out of the blue and try to get something going. Warren Cromartie, told me recently, and he told a talk show host in Montreal recently, that he's trying to get Japanese investors in Japan, where he lives about 6 months of the year as a broadcaster. But nobody has come forth in the 2.5 years since the Tampa Bay situation was turned down.
Danny, I want to take you back to that year, 1988, when you became the beat reporter for the Montreal Expos while working with the Montreal Daily News.
That's right.
And coincidentally, at my age, that was around the time that I started watching baseball in earnest. Started collecting baseball cards in 88. By 89, I was watching most games on TV that I could watch after school when I could watch them. I was a big fan, 1988, 1989. I'll start with that. Now, you told a story on the Good Seats Still Available podcast episode. And at the end of this episode, I do want to kind of rattle off some appearances that you've made, and I'll list them in the show notes. But you told a great story about one of your favorite Expo players, Rusty Staub. When he comes back to Montreal around the time that I was born, late July of '79, and you described this setting that I don't recall seeing in 1989, 1990, 91 on TV. You described something like 50,000 Expos fans cheering as loud as they can. He's coming up to bat as a pinch hitter in the second game of a doubleheader, if I'm remembering this correctly. And I'm curious if you can describe for our listeners who, like me, I mean, we're not 25, but we're 45, and we just don't remember just a rocking crowd at Olympic Stadium. What was it like back then?
It was electric. You see, he had been with Detroit and several other teams after he left the Expos in 1971 and went to the Mets. He had 3 years with the Expos, 69, 70, 71. And so he was like an early franchise hero in Montreal. People loved him. And when they brought him back in that trade with Detroit in July of 1979, they had played several games on the road, and then they finally came back to Montreal for his first game back in Montreal. So at that time, I was working for the Ottawa Journal newspaper, but not as I did not go to the game as a reporter. I went there with my girlfriend because I'd grown up in the Ottawa area and went to a number of Expos games as a fan before I became a beat writer, a beat writer in '88. So that game, it was electrifying. So he comes up as a pinch hitter, and he can't get into the batter's box because the fan noise is so much. He had to step out several times. It was electric. It wasn't so much the at-bat itself, it was the moment in which he tried to get into the box, and the fan applause was so deafening that he had to step out several times. It was just an applause of a hero coming back to Montreal. Maybe, I don't know whether you call him the prodigal son, but it was quite a tremendous gathering. He went out, he popped up to the outfield, but the moment of him being in the batter's box was electrifying.
Wow. And and coming back to 1988, this must be an exciting year for you. Otis Nixon signs with the Expos, granted free agency by the Indians, I believe. He comes over. Randy Johnson, the big unit, a late September call-up. Do you have any special memories in '88? Maybe like when did you see Randy Johnson in spring training? Do you remember seeing him around the clubhouse there at the very end of the season?
Yeah, I was covering for the Montreal Daily News when he made his first appearance for the Expos in Montreal. And so, he walks in the clubhouse, he's 6'10". You're looking up at him. He said, I'm looking forward to this game. And he won, from what I remember, he won his first game. And then he was kind of up and down to, Indianapolis for '88 and '89. And then, Dan, as you know, he got traded to Seattle along with Brian Holman and Gene Harris for Mike Langston. And they wanted to go for it. They wanted an experienced pitcher like Mike Langston. And at the time, they were leading the National League East by, a fair number of games. And Langston, they wanted somebody else to come in and continue the push for win the National League East. And Langston was reasonably good, but the bats fell apart in August and September, and just a real fiasco. They finished up at 81 and 81. And, it was a case of the Expos felt that Randy Johnson maybe wasn't quite ready to come in and be a pitcher on a full-time basis, because at the time of the trade, he was in the minor leagues. But it's like pushing the cart before the horse. Could you have waited until Randy got better? But that particular year, they were getting close to a championship, NL championship, and the owner, Charles Baughman, gave Dave Dombrowski, the manager, to go ahead and make this trade. So, but then, everybody today is criticizing that trade, but there's also some people who like the trade because the Expos pushed to get a better pitcher into the rotation.
Danny, there's just so much to cover here, but a lot of things on my mind I want to talk about, and then talk about some things in the book. You may have mentioned this or certainly written about it in some prior books, but wow, if Major League Baseball had just one wild card, two, or certainly three wild cards like we have now in the early 80s, in the mid 80s, maybe, at the end of the 70s, it is preposterous. 1981, 1987 Expos, 20 games over 500, 91 and 71. They finished third in the division. Do not reach the playoffs. Of course, everybody knows about the 94 team. The 93 team, 94 and 68. That's good for second place. Missed the playoffs. There's another year here. I think there are 30 games over 500. 1979, 95 and 65. And in 79, that's good enough for second place. A lot of young baseball fans are maybe hearing that and thinking, how are you just knocking them dead and finishing with a few games shy of 100 wins, and you're not playing in October?
It's really crazy. As you say, 79 and 80 and 82, they had a good team, and then they kind of faded. But 79, 80, 1993, 1987, it was just some great, great baseball. They should have been really unfortunate that they didn't get into the playoffs. Now, the Expos had a mini dynasty from 79 to 82. They finally get into the playoffs in 81, but they probably had even better teams in 79, 80. And some people said the team in 82 was really, really good too. But and even 83 and 83 they faded too. But I agree with you. If they had the wild card, it would have been so much better for the popularity of baseball in those years in Montreal and general in baseball.
Because and Montreal is a unique city, in the sense that there's always events and festivals and things to do with your money, and places to take the kids, and places to go on a date besides going to a baseball game. It's not totally unlike a lot of other cities, but do you think Montreal always struggled with that, where if they just had one playoff berth via a wild card, or if they had, 1981 goes differently, and they reach the postseason, they win the pennant. It's like they needed one postseason run to compete with all the other events in town, and just going into the next year, being a strong draw all the time.
Exactly. They in 93, that team was almost good as 94. 93, they changed a few people for 94, but that was a tremendous team. If they had been able to keep a lot of those players with maybe a bigger budget, then they maybe could have, maybe even 92 when Felipe took over, it turned out to be a pretty good team at the end. And then 94, as with the strike, weren't able to complete that year, and that would have been a wild card year. Let's say even if they had not won first place, they probably would have made the playoffs as a wild card. And then, with playoff money, let's say 79, 80, 87, 93, and 94, you're able to build up a revenue chest of money to keep players to stay around for a few years. But what happened with the 94 team when that strike carried into the next year, and then it was finally settled, the Expos ownership wanted to trade Ken Hill, Moises Grissom, John Wetland, and they didn't want to offer a contract to Wyatt Walker. So that was kind of like the beginning of the end of the Expos, but they stayed around for 10 more years.
Yeah, and those are fan favorites. Those are kids going to these ball games. They love Larry Walker. They love Moises Grissom, and that had, especially when the Marlins, in 1997, they won the World Series, and then all those players are gone the next year.
Yeah.
Danny, there's and folks, again, this book Explosion, which I've been just having a blast reading. You can flip it open to any chapter, and a lot of fascinating stuff. But without giving too much away, you've got a chapter in here where Claude Delorme, the executive vice president of business affairs, not somebody's name that people may be familiar with in the media or the reports of the end of the Expos, but this is literally the guy that turned off the lights for the last time in the offices at Olympic Stadium by himself. The way that you wrote in that chapter, Danny, just about gave me goosebumps. It's very almost a visceral feeling, because he's kind of spending more time in Florida at that time, kind of getting into the spring of 05, but he's flying back up to Montreal to tie up some loose ends. And then, of course, that there's a final day where you're not coming back to that ballpark, and very lonely, very melancholy description of how it all ended. I just can't imagine. He spent 20 years with the ball club. I think you wrote in that chapter that he would have stayed forever. Very sad.
Yeah, see, that what you're telling me is just sending shivers up my spine right now, Dan. Just thinking of Claude Delorme, because he was an unsung hero who maybe most people didn't know about, but he worked his buns off to keep it alive as the vice president of business operations, the stadium operations. And at the end, on September 28th, which is the night of the 28th after the game, all of a sudden, there was a rumor that the team is finally moving to Washington. There had been no signal all through the 2004 season that the team was going to be moved. There was a schedule made up for the 2005 season with Montreal in it. And then, so Claude Delorme was the guy. It wasn't the president of the team or the general manager who kind of was winding up the operations and doing interviews with the media. Tony Tavares and the president and Omar Minaya, they had something to do with the end of it too. But Claude became the spokesperson, explaining to the media what's going on. And they had somebody from Major League Baseball who came to Montreal in secret conditions to speak to the players. He was not introduced to the crowd, but the crowd would have really booed him. I'm not trying to remember that guy's name, but your story is really a lot of intrigue about Claude Delorme coming a couple of times to Olympic Stadium for a few months after they left for Washington and conducting league matters, winding up the Expos operations. And then I think I like the way you put it, April 30th of 2005, and he turns out the lights for the last time. It was really, I've got shivers right now.
And then, other nameless people in the organization, secretaries, uh, just various office personnel that had perhaps been with the Expos for 7 years or 10 or 12 or how. There had to have been people like that all of a sudden, like you said, the end came at the end of the season. It wasn't like they knew in July, hey, this is going to be a wrap in a few months. What those people weren't going to Washington. They um, live and work in Montreal. They work for the Expos. How many people do you think from the front office were just on edge of which direction this was going to take, and then they got to go find work somewhere else?
Yeah, the rumors and the scuttlebutt had been going on for 2 or 3 years, ever since Major League Baseball took over the Expos by buying the team from Jeffrey Loyer, who bought the Florida Marlins, and John Henry, the Red Sox, uh, came in and bought the Red Sox. So I suppose it was not a total surprise that the Expos were moving to Washington, but it was still a shock. On the day of the 29th, the final home game, a lot of the players who I talked to in that book and other books, they weren't in street clothes. They may have been in their uniforms too, but they walked into the Expos office to say goodbye to the Expos employees. It was very tearful for some of those players and the employees. It was really heartbreaking. And, after the final game, Brad Wilkerson broke down in tears because he was thinking of those employees who were no longer going to have a job. So he had to be held up and composed by Claude Raymond, the former Expo, who was doing some speeches. And he had to hold his arm around Brad Wilkerson and tell him, hang in there. But Brad Wilkerson, he was the epitome of the grief and the depression that took place on the final game in September 29, 2004.
Somebody had to be the guy to wear it, I guess, or to carry it all on his shoulders.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, I talked to a few of those in this book. I made an attempt. This is my big attempt, although I tried in other books, but this was a big attempt to explore how that came about, that the team was leaving on the 29th, and that there had been a relocation committee set up earlier in 2004 as to where they might send the Expos. It could have been Portland, Oregon, or Charlotte, North Carolina, or Nashville. Or so I talked to some of those people who were on the relocation committee, and I wrote a letter to Bud Selig at his house address to see if he might talk to me again. I'd talked to him before, and he was kind enough to talk to me, but this time he didn't want to talk. Yeah, maybe he just didn't want to. He talked enough about this topic. But anyway, there is several chapters in there, Dan, about the relocation of the team. So I kind of explored that topic in a big way in this book.
another thing I wrote down here, and I think this is something you said on a podcast episode that I really appreciate, Danny, because I like to have guests on my show that sometimes it's a singer-songwriter that's trying to get their music out there, and they're not a household name, but man, they've got some great songs. Or I've had some ball players. I've had Major League Baseball players or former players, independent league ball players. But you said that you do a lot of stories on players who are not stars. These are the utility men, the pinch hitters, the platoon players, trying to give some recognition on what they encountered. I always had a fascination with those guys that maybe were big personality, not a big bat, but you love seeing them on TV when their number was called in the ninth inning. You're just thinking, okay, let's one swing of the bat, let's get some a couple runs in here, and you really do a great job of romanticizing those players in this book, Explosion, and I'm sure in some past books as well. And one that I particularly enjoyed was being Dan time was the Dan Norman chapter. Dan Norman, who I learned reading his story, and he's the current manager for the Chatham-Kent Barnstormers, which I had a guest on the show, Dan Kabelka, who founded or brought Challenger Baseball to Chatham over 30 years ago. Challenger Baseball being a program for children and adults with special needs. But I love the story about Dan Norman. Wanted to be a stuntman, wanted to get involved in movies. And reading about his career, it sounded like everywhere he was, whether it's Cincinnati or the Mets, and he's involved in the Seaver trade, the Reardon trade. Everywhere he goes, it's a stacked outfield. Where is he going to fit in? Exactly. And it reminded me, there's so many players, and I'm glad that you highlight these guys, that superstars sometimes become superstars because a lot of them had the natural ability, but a lot of them also got regular playing time. So if you're with an organization and you're not playing every day at the major league level, your narrative maybe goes a different way. But love that stuff, Danny. And what are some thoughts there on Dan Norman?
Oh wow! So, see, I've done a fair number of work in the movie business as an actor and sort of a part-time actor since 1995. So I found it intriguing when he started talking that he worked in several movies and he wanted to be a stuntman. But he was his football team was picked to go and be part of some movie. I forget. I don't have the book in front of me, but so I don't think he never did get to learn to be a stuntman, but because he had some other things he had to do, and then he became a minor league player, and he played a little bit with the Expos and Mets, and but he didn't, as you say, when he got to the Expos were stacked, and he told me, I'm not going to get much playing time here,
You got Andre Dawson and Tim Raines and Warren Cromartie in the outfield. Where
exactly. So, and then he got himself a niche of coaching baseball for many, many years. And that's what he's been doing. And so Chatham-Kent of the Ontario's County Baseball League in Canada picked him to be the manager last year in the first season, and he's back again this year. But he's like an unsung hero. He never played much in the majors. I like to humanize these part-time players. I like the word you use, romanticize these players, because people don't necessarily hear about them much, or maybe they don't want their baseball card or autograph because they're part-time players. But I think they're really an important part of the team, because without them, it gives the team credibility to have these part-time players. One of my favorite players, I'll do it quick, in the book is Rick DeHart from Topeka, Kansas, who found out about an Expos training camp in Florida. So he took a Greyhound bus from Kansas to Florida, and he ended up getting a contract out of the camp and got enough service time in the major leagues to get a pension plan. So that's an example of a guy I love to talk about.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask who is maybe your all-time favorite utility player, if you have one from all the years.
I would think that Otis Nixon, you mentioned him at the start,
Oh
when
yeah.
he came in '88. He had some drug problems with the Atlanta Braves. No,
Now
I
the
forget
Indians.
who it was, but the Expos have had a history of reclamation projects. Somebody who was into drugs or alcohol or hearing impediment in case of Curtis Pride. But Otis had some drug problems. Dennis Martinez had drug problems. Well, no, he was more of a drinking problem. Dennis didn't have a drug problem, but they decided to bring up Otis Nixon from the minors a couple months into the '88 season, and he was just gangbusters for the Expos on the base pass. And he was good until spring training in 1991 when he was traded to Atlanta. So they had him for 3 years, and he was shocked when he was traded. It was on April's Day, April the 1st, and when he came out of the meeting, he said, "I thought it was an April Fool's Day joke." And so, and I was told that he cried his eyes out when he was traded to Atlanta because he loved Montreal so much. And he was traded to give Marquise Grissom more playing time because Grissom was coming into the forefront as a pretty good player. So they wanted to give Grissom more playing time in the outfield. But no, Otis always been great to talk to over the years. And he
I,
always remembers me.
I've got a copy of his book from many years ago, Keeping It Real.
Oh, yeah.
The interesting book that my uncle, a huge Atlanta Braves fan, gave to me a long time ago.
Was it?
It's called Keeping It Real for Otis Nixon.
I see. Okay.
Uh,
Yes, the same year they brought up Rick Sutler, who was failing in the Yankees organization. So the two of them brought up some speed that year and with the team for a few years.
I wanted to pull out a box score or a game that you might remember because now in Major League Baseball we have they call the ghost runner rule or the ghost runner on second for extra innings, kind of speed up the game. Don't see as many of the 14, 15, 16 inning games. But if you remember the 60s, 70s, 80s, maybe some of the 90s, it wasn't uncommon for a lot of teams to play a good handful of multi-inning, 12 plus extra inning ball games. Danny, I'm sure you do, remember the 22 inning Expos Dodgers game, August 23rd, 1989, which was at the time, maybe without precedent, scoreless until the 22nd inning.
It was unbelievable. I was there in the press box and sitting through. It started on the 23rd and ended on the 24th. So you can believe what going more than two full games and nobody scored. And, you know, there was a lot of interesting things that went on. Larry Walker in right field made what you call a phantom catch of a ball that appeared to go into his glove, but he actually trapped it. But the umpires called it out. And Larry Walker was also nailed for leaving third base on a sacrifice fly by Mike Fitzgerald, and they called him out. But Walker said he didn't leave early. There was something going on between him and some of the umpires, but he'd only been in the major leagues for a few games, and all of a sudden he was causing problems with the umpires. But you know, Dennis Martinez, the starting pitcher, came in to pitch the 22nd inning, and Rick Dempsey hit it out, his former teammate in Baltimore. So very few relief performances ever by Dennis Martinez, and he wasn't exactly too happy about that. Boy, that was a long game for sure.
And I'm looking at the box score. John Wetland for the Dodgers eventually comes over to the Expos, gets the win. He had pitched. It's wild looking at these box scores. The Dodgers use only 5 pitchers. It'd be unheard of in today's game. 7 innings for Hershiser, 7 scoreless innings, 2 for Jay Howell, Alejandro Pena, 4 scoreless, Tim Cruz, not to believe the late Tim Cruz, 3 scoreless, 6 scoreless for Wetland. Just insanity. Pascual Perez starts the game. Do you have any memories of Pascual Perez? Well, maybe not the best question, but what are some special memories with Pascual?
Well, he was called Prancing Pascual Perez because he loved to scoot around the field. He did not walk onto the field. He ran onto the pitcher's mound, and when the inning was over, he was running into the dugout. And then he would pull some tricks like he pretending to throw the ball underneath his legs to second base to pick off the runner. He's pulling funny little tricks like that too. And he would have this pitch. It was a really slow, up in the air pitch. I guess they call it the office pitch, EUPHUS or something. But he was a real showman. He was really a character, and the media loved him. The fans loved him. Management loved him. When he went to the Yankees in 1989 as a free agent, 3 years for $5.7 million, the Expos offered him 3 for like maybe 4.5. Dave Dombrowski was in tears when I talked to him when he signed with the Yankees because the Expos looked after him. He had drug problems. They had taken to meetings for, I guess, AA meetings or rehab meetings in Montreal to help him out. They really cared for Pascual Perez. And when he went to the Yankees, he got back into his own drug problems and he hardly ever played pitch in the majors again. So he was always a favorite of mine and the media and the fans and the management. And, unfortunately, he got killed a number of years ago.
Well,
we were talking about reclamation projects. My favorite player is a tie between Rusty and Dennis Martinez. So because in '88 I got to know Dennis Martinez, and since then we talked maybe 2 or 3 times a year. He gave me a good scoop one time in the dugout before a game. In the Expos dugout, he was the only player in the Expos dugout while everybody was out doing BP and stretching. So I decided I'm going over to talk to him. He tells me that he signed a 2-year contract extension. Nobody had it the next day. It's just unbelievable. Gave me a great scoop.
Wow.
Yeah. And he made a great recovery from his alcohol problem with the Expos. And he voted in the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame. He had 245 wins. He's not quite good enough stats for Cooperstown, but he pretty good pitcher for the Expos.
And speaking of Dan Duquette, do you think with the budget limitations, I think even that '94 team, they were next to last in payroll, and were able to put that product out there. Do you think that Dan Duquette, he's not trying to get a bunch of ragtag guys, but some, like you said, some guys that have some drug or alcohol problems, and he's just got to weigh it and say, I think we can do something here. This is not, this guy's not a total mess, and I don't have a lot of money like the Yankees or the Dodgers do, so we're just going to take a flyer on some guys, and we think we can make it work with some others, and just, I almost feel like you get some of those guys together that are not attractive to some of those other clubs with money, and all of a sudden you've got a lively clubhouse. You've got a group of guys that they've got some life experiences that they can relate, and then there's the chemistry starts to form. But maybe kind of a loaded, meandering question there, but was that part of it, you think, with Duquette and how he had to assemble the roster?
Yeah, there was a number, Dan and Dave Dombrowski, I guess, and even Murray Cook. But Tim Burke was a reliever in the Mets system and had alcohol problems. And they decided to trade for him. Not too sure who they gave up for him, but he turned out to be a great relief pitcher until 1991, and he started to fade, and he may have been with the Yankees originally, but he was traded to the Mets for Ron Darling, and then Ron Darling didn't last very long with the Expos that year. But you see, Oil Can Boyd was another guy that the Expos brought in to replace Pascual Perez. So they got another showman in return of Pascual, but Oil Can is a showman in himself, with colorful running off the field and punching the air and so on. And he told me a funny story. Every time he'd come in after pitching, he would go into the hallway beside the dugout and smoke cigarettes. And he wouldn't know what was going on in the field. But he concentrated on the cigarettes.
Wow.
But he was really, by the quote, he was loved. So I interviewed him for a book a couple of years ago. But it's you're right that the Expos knew that they didn't have a lot of money to spend on these guys, but they wanted to take a flyer on them, as you say. And in most cases, they turned out pretty good, especially Dennis Martinez. He lasted, 7.5 years?
Right. Well, I was going to ask for maybe some thoughts on Philippe Alou. I love what you said. I couldn't agree more. He should have been a manager long before 1992. It's, I mean, I want to say inexcusable when you kind of look, if you just kind of Google 1988 managers in Major League Baseball, 89, or maybe even 1990. And it's a lot of accomplished names, some future Hall of Famers, but a lot of guys that look like you and me. And I don't know what Philippe had not proven by the end of the 90s or by the middle of the 80s that didn't warrant giving him a shot. But I love what you say there, that he had the bona fides, and we just, I think as a society, it just took us a little too long to put guys like him in the driver's seat.
Yeah, for sure. After the 1982 season, when Jim Fanning, managed that year after Blue Monday in 1981, they brought in Bill Burden, but that's when they should have hired Philippe Alou. And when Bill Burden was done after 2 years, they brought in Buck Rogers. Buck Rogers turned out to be a pretty good manager, but on the second attempt, instead of Buck, they probably should have hired Felipe. But I've written about it, that the Expos, they maybe didn't want to give colored people a chance as a manager. The Charles Maupin and John McHale and Jim Fanning, all, kind of like part of the white establishment. But it took far too long for Felipe to be brought in as manager. And in '90, after the Buck was fired, that's when Dave Dombrowski should have hired Felipe there, but then he hired Tom Reynolds. But finally, he got his chance. But if Felipe had been brought in the '80s, probably he would have maybe guided those guys to some championships, and maybe he would be a manager elected into Cooperstown. But he didn't have enough wins to get into Cooperstown. But he was certainly a great manager.
Yeah, some of the names from 92, and these are, like I said, future or current Hall of Famers. Sparky Anderson, Bobby Cox, Roger Craig, Jim Fregrossi, Phil Garner, Mike Hargrove, Butch Hobson, Art Howell, Tom Kelly, Gene Lamont, Tony La Russa. But it's only Felipe Alou and Cito Gaston, the two Canadian franchise managers that are of color. Unless I'm missing, or Hal McRae, I'm sorry, the Kansas City Royals.
Yeah.
Really, I meant to mention this earlier, but the chapter on, do you say Moises Alou or Moises? I've heard it said both ways.
Moises
Alou and pre-ARB players. You really go into some great detail about the situation that he ran into there in, I believe it was 92, 93.
Yeah, he was upset, and the agent Bob Lamont, because they were only going to offer him, I think originally about 290 in his third year when he was not eligible for arbitration. He was a pre-arb guy, and the pre-arb guys they just have to accept what the team is going to give it to him. And then, so I wrote the story in the Globe and Mail with Bob Lamont, and Bob Lamont, it's one of the few times he's ever blown off steam to a reporter about whether football or baseball. So I got a big scoop in the Globe and Mail that day, and then the media followed up on it in Montreal, and then when he got to spring training, he showed up several days late, and he arranged to meet with Bill Stoneman, and Stoney decided to give him, I think it was, they brought it up to, I think gave him a $25,000 extra, bring him up to $315,000. But it's funny, that year, the Blue Jays, and I've written about that before, the pre-arb guys, Sean Green, Paulo Delgado, and Alex Gonzalez, they were going into their same year, and the Blue Jays gave all three of them $500,000, but they only wanted to give the Moises and anybody else who came along $315,000. That was the plateau, and that was it. They weren't going to move on it. And most teams never would do what the Blue Jays did. $500,000. That was quite a nice chunk of money for team players going into their third year.
Yeah.
And I wrote that story in the Globe and Mail about those three guys. And then I said I said something in the story. I said they should be happy that they got $500,000. I heard it by scuttlebutt that the guy didn't like what I wrote. But the Blue Jays I've treated the pre-arb guys pretty good over the years. And now the minimum wage is what? I think it's $760. So now they don't necessarily go too high for most of those guys. But anyway, the Expos had a small payroll, so they had to cut costs any way possible.
Now, Danny, you've called Toronto home for the past 25 or so years. Do you get out to Blue Jays games? Do you still like to go to major league ballparks?
Well, I go maybe 2 or 3 times a year, watch them a lot on TV and follow them. Like I tell people, I've been following the Blue Jays since 1977 when they came into being in the American League. And then a lot of these people know I'm an Expos guy. So some of them like to pick on me and say, "Oh no, you're following the wrong team." But they're Canada's 2 major league ball teams, so started following the Expos in '69, and then the Blue Jays in '77. So the Blue Jays are still a team I follow.
Well, a couple other tidbits here. I'd love to continue talking for another hour. This has just been fascinating, Danny, and hopefully we can do it again in the future. But I wanted to point out to you, Jeff Facero I live near Pensacola, Florida, and about 10 years ago, 2014-15, he was the pitching coach for the AA Pensacola Blue Wahoos, which at that time I believe we were a Cincinnati Reds affiliate. So I remember seeing Facero on the field there. Were there some guys that maybe took some time to warm up to you, to give you a quote after a game? Some guys that were a little standoffish that you couldn't figure out how to approach them, and then as the season wore on, or maybe a couple of seasons, they, were very eager to speak with you or comfortable talking with you?
I would say, as far as acquiring interviews for all the different books, some of them didn't want to talk. I think I can say the majority would talk. A few of them I needed intermediaries, people like an agent or a scout for the team, and they went to that person and said, "Okay, Danny would like to talk to you." Whereas on my own, they had not shown any interest in talking to me.
Mm-hmm.
But like Ken Phelps, he in 1980, we played in 1982 and didn't play much. He asked to be traded, and he traded to Seattle. And I wanted to talk to him because he was mentioned on Seinfeld. He got traded to by somehow, and the Yankees were involved. And anyway, somebody gave me information that he lived in Phoenix or something. So I wrote a postal letter. One of my strategies, Dan, and when I'm trying to contact people, if I can't get a hold of them by text, email, or phone call, is write them postal letter by slow mail.
Oh yeah.
So he answered me. He called up one time. He said, "It's Ken Phelps." Oh, shoot. I was really happy. So I talked about him, one of my chapters a couple of years ago. So he talked about his time at the Expos, which wasn't very long, and then he talked about the thrill of getting mentioned on Seinfeld with who's that player and the other player, I forget. But the other player, Bill Stoneman, was general manager in '88. We're going back to '88 or '89. Oh, shoot, I can't even think of his name. Jay Bruner from the Yankees. Stoneman wanted Jay Bruner from the Yankees to come for a trade, and he was willing to trade. Oh, I forget. But Buck Rogers talked Stoney out of the trade because Buck told Stoney he wanted Dave Martinez, that little outfielder with the Cubs. And so they traded, and the Yankees moved on and talked to other people and traded him, Jay Bruner, to Seattle. And Stoneman traded Mitch Webster, who had a few good years and then was fading, traded him to the Cubs for Dave Martinez. But Jay Bruner went on and had a number of big years with the Mariners. Dave Martinez, I've mentioned this before. It's one of those affairs that I mention from time to time in my books. He was traded from the Cubs to the Expos because Ryan Sandberg found out Dave Martinez was fooling around with his wife. So he went to Jim Fry. Sandberg went to Jim Fry and said, "Look, you trade me or trade Martinez." And of course, they're not going to trade Martinez. Not going to trade Sandberg, the best player maybe. So they traded Martinez.
I think I remember hearing that story.
Yeah. But as far as players, when I was playing, I can generally say that a lot of them were pretty good cooperative.
Would you ever have guys talk to you a little bit off the record? You're just sitting, and all of a sudden now you're just hanging out. And would they ever say things to you without mentioning any names, like describing some personal problems that they're going through, or hey, I've got a lot on my mind right now? Sometimes as fans, we see a certain player going through a slump, and we don't know that maybe he's going through a divorce or has a problem with one of his kids getting into trouble, or just lost a mother or father, or things like that. Did any guys ever open up to you and just say, "Hey, look, just don't obviously don't print this," but
yeah, it's interesting. Well, I can tell you a bit about the next book. Shoot, I forget your name now. I read, but yeah, I'm trying to think of guys who fit into that question. Or so to a guy I know now, Jamie Carl, for the next book. He was like passed over by the Expos for a few years in the minor leagues. And then in 2002, he got his chance to play with that team when they were first owned by Major League Baseball. So he's a guy who I had to get his agent to get him to talk to me, because I made a phone call to him several years ago. I returned the phone call. And so his mother died while he was playing, not for the Expos, but for somebody else. So he told me about that. And her favorite color was purple, and he was traded to the Rockies, which their favorite color is purple.
oh wow,
So he told me a number of different stories that he was like, he was just a part-time player, one of these guys that not a star player. And I loved that kind of a story. So I do that story talking about him growing up. That's how I like to talk about the player when they're growing up as well, not just in the major league, but in the minor leagues, in the tyke or whatever. And Jamie Carl ended up with more than 10 years of major league service, good for a full pension. Just a part-time player playing for a number of teams. Just a hell of a guy. And he appreciated me writing about him. He said, I think I'm very humbled that you're writing about me.
yeah, that's so rewarding.
Yeah.
And I love that you take an interest in those types of players and help to humanize them, because they are part of the narrative of the Montreal Expos. And especially now, I don't know that fans are with social media. Some fans can be really, really hard on players. Not that players aren't used to getting heckled, but the death threats and the just awful things that they say and post on social media. They just see these guys as commodities, but they're human beings with wives and families. Um, and I don't even think when we hear that a guy hits the IL for 10 days or 60 days that we really care about the injury, or what what repercussions this has for his life for the next 3 months. Because it could be a really depressing period for an athlete, where you're in the middle of a playoff chase, and now all of a sudden you're sitting on your sofa with your dog running around and just flipping through the channels. I don't think people really think about stuff like that, but you do a great job in going to fascinating detail on some of these players that I don't think you're going to get from any other source or many other sources. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Going into detail, as you say, getting insider quotes and fascinating information that would be appealing to readers. So that's really what it is, to say humanizing these players. even the star players, like humanizing them too and talking about their lives. Tim Wallach in 1989, 90, 91, 92, I wrote a fair amount of him that he was disappointed in the contract talks and he was getting less money than Andre Gallagher and Tim Book. They were making more money than him. And it was more the agent that was, telling me all this stuff. And Tim pulled me aside one game in Montreal and said, look at Danny, you're going to talk about this. Talk to me. Don't talk to my agent. So Tim, he's a really quiet, intense, passionate player. Hard to say. I can't say that Tim is somebody that's really admires me, but I've always admired him for the way he played. Solid third baseman and pretty good hitter for all those years. He has been kind of, even after all, he's down on me because of all of this stuff. And he bunch of those guys in the clubhouse hated Dennis Martinez because he's always mouthing off the media and the guys in the left-hand corner like Spike Owen and Tom Foley and Dennis Martinez. They'd hate me when I go and talk to Dennis Martinez.
But you had a really good perspective when you're around these guys all the time. You know who gets along with who, and when there's 9 guys on the field, you know that this guy hates this guy's guts, but they're on the same team and they got to focus on getting the next out. But you were probably acutely aware of when the shortstop and the center fielder are not on speaking terms.
Yeah, you see, when Dennis Martinez pitched his no-hitter perfect game, July the 28th, 1991, one of the first guys to hug him is Tim Wallach. Even though they didn't get along, it had been acknowledged in the media that they didn't ever get along because Wallach didn't like Martinez spouting off. Sometimes he criticized the hitters. If they had no offense, he'd criticize the hitters. And of course, Wallach and those guys didn't like that. But in that moment, Tim Wallach hugged Dennis Martinez.
Baseball will do that. Finally, I know I was saying probably 20 minutes ago, got to wrap up, but I like the way that this book is written, and I've got some catching up to do on the other titles. But Danny, you really have some fun with these chapters. There is where is it here? There's some play on words. I'm looking for one here. Like, oh, bear with me. There was one I was looking for, but there are about 50 chapters. But one I wanted to call out was, and I laughed out loud. The chapter is called Olympic Stadium Bullshit. It's exactly what it is. That right away just told me, I mean, I'm 2 pages in, I'm looking at the table of contents before I start reading. I think, okay, this is going to be a fun book.
Yeah. So Olympic Stadium has been a fiasco since it came into being in 1976, especially with the roof. A lot of times would never work, so a lot of times you just kept it permanently closed. And now the latest ridicule is that they're spending 870 million Canadian to fix up the roof and the technical ring around the roof. And it's another joke about the Olympic Stadium. So, I mentioned earlier that when they were fixing up Olympic Stadium with the roof, and they reconfigured it to not have a baseball field as part of the complex. So that entered into my headline of Olympic Stadium bullshit. So, and then, you know, it's been what's the word, a cavernous stadium wide open, but, and, you know, Rob Manfred has said that if a new team does come to Montreal, they have to have a new stadium in downtown Montreal. But I think there's some leeway that I think they could play in Olympic Stadium for 1 or 2 years while the new stadium is built, if it's ever come to fruition. That they might still be able to use Olympic Stadium, because when the Blue Jays were playing there, they brought it up to Major League Baseball standards with different types of little renovations.
I wrote this down in around 2000. I guess there was an architect that the Expos hired to put together a rendering of what I guess they were going to call Labatt Park would look like under the Lauria ownership, and this just never came to be for various reasons. But there was, I guess, a downtown conceptualized stadium. And it looked like they were trying to go the opposite of what maybe some of the new ballparks at that time were going for, more of a concrete and steel look.
Yeah, Claude Brochu thought he had something going in 97, 98, and then Lawyer thought he had something. The Quebec premier in the days of Brochu told Bud Silic and Claude Brochu at a meeting in Montreal or wherever, Quebec City, that the Quebec government was not prepared to support funds for a new stadium in Montreal when they're closing hospitals in Quebec. So, the Quebec premier, just, not exactly maybe a baseball fan per se, but they just didn't get the job done, or it was Lawyer, Brochu. And people are down on Brochu because of the 94 situation and the not getting the stadium done. But I've always been in Brochu's corner. Every book I write, I'm in Brochu's corner, even though that thing happened in 94 where you get rid of those guys. And we have a good relationship, but I've never liked Jeffrey Lawyer. But nah. Like I said in my post today when he fired Philippe Lou, who's a shyster, that he leaked it to the New York Times. Jack Curry with the New York Times at the time, and now he's with the Yes Network. But he wanted to leak the news to the New York Times because he still lives in New York City, Florida. But, hopefully sometime in the next few years, somebody's going to come along and maybe have the funds to fund the team. You never know.
Well, Danny, with your, again, like I said earlier, with your help, and I know there's a documentary, No More, the saga of the Montreal Expos, the memorabilia. Maybe, like I said, 2029 is maybe at least a year that will reveal some more, give us some prospects of what's realistic.
The Nose of Mirror documentary is one thing, and the annual Expos Fest Autograph Festival that's held every April since, it's 10 years now. 1,000 people show up. They pay $200 a shot for autographs, a meal, and free beer and wine. that's another example of the interest showing, in a new team. And then there's another documentary coming out sometime in 2025 or 2026 on Netflix, talking about the Expos again. And so you never know in the next few years that something might happen. But it's going to take a lot of money, Dan.
Well, Danny, I want to call out some of the titles. This is not comprehensive because there's a few more, and there's a couple books that you've written that are not Expos related. But here's some to check out, folks. I also had this listed, but of course, Explosion, we've been talking about today. Always Remembered, new revelations and old tales about those fabulous Expos. Blue Monday, this is a book that Danny on another episode said that some of his fans or readers, they just won't buy this one. It's too depressing for them. But Blue Monday is the Expos, Dodgers, and the home run that changed everything. There is Never Forgotten, tales about Ron LaFleur, Ron Hunt, and other Expos yarns from 69 to 04. There's Bases Loaded. There is Ecstasy to Agony. There's You Don't Forget Homers Like That. So I urge you, and you can find all these titles on Amazon or wherever you buy books. If you've got that special baseball fan in your life, or you are that special baseball fan, and I emphasize baseball fan, whether or not you follow the Expos or you just have some nostalgia about baseball, which who doesn't if you're a fan, this is a great gift idea and a great diversion from whatever's happening in your life, and you just need to get your hands on something that's a page turner and take your mind off of whatever is stressing you in 2025, which could be anything, really, the way that things are happening. But
I see what I'm doing. I'm keeping the Expos legacy alive, and it's another example of the enthusiasm I'm trying to create, for another team. That's what I'm doing. But I'm creating and writing stories for the benefit of Expos fans when there's no team there. I'm keeping the legacy alive. They haven't had a team for 21 years, but I love writing about the Expos.
it's just if I think, without Danny Gallagher and these titles, and you always, if with the consistency here, if you've been reading, you can be sure another one's probably coming pretty soon. I think it's comforting to a lot of baseball fans and Montreal Expos fans that you're out there blowing the horn. And again, thank you. As a baseball fan, I've a long time into the episode now to reveal I'm a Chicago Cub fan. But I remember in those late or 89, early 90s, mid 90s, we were National League East division rivals. I watched a lot of games between the Cubs and Expos, and I really appreciate what you're doing.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been baseball has been a passion of mine. I grew up playing baseball, competitive adult baseball, for 27 consecutive years in different parts of Canada, where I was reporter, and then to get on the beat in 1988, it just electrified my passion for baseball and the Expos. And thank you so much for having me on the show. It's been a real blast and talking to you and reliving all these memories.
Oh, I love it. I love it, Danny. Trying to think of a question I haven't asked to wrap us up here, but how about something that maybe you haven't been asked? Every ballpark has, hot dogs and other things on the menu. Was there anything there at Olympic Stadium that you liked? Are you a hot dog guy, or what was something that was, if you're going to the concession stand at Olympic Stadium and somebody like me, you never went there, never saw a ball game there, what would you say? Hey, you need to try this.
Well, they had hot dogs, but they also had poutine, which is famous in Quebec and Montreal. And then even before the games, they had the the Upa band, stirring up excitement. That was one of the Expos games, and Fernand Lapierre on the organist playing different songs. Take me out to the ball game, and so there was the food, and then there's the ambience that created a nice atmosphere at the Expos games at Jerry Park or Olympic Stadium. It's and then those guys walking around blowing those flutes. They're pretty noisy,
yes.
but
and let me not forget to make mention of Yuppie.
Exactly. They're another famous character since 1979, and he got thrown out of the game in the 2020 game by Tommy Lasorda.
I was about to say, wasn't it Yuppie that really got under Lasorda's skin one particular game, or maybe multiple times? I don't know.
And there's the video, the third base umpire, he goes like this, pointing to Yuppie, "You're out of here." And everybody, and since then, even for all these years after, before he died, everybody's all criticizing Tommy Lasorda for doing that.
Yeah. Okay. People are on social media. Where can they find you? What's the handle for Danny Gallagher again?
Yeah, on Twitter it's Dano Gallagher, Danno Gallagher, Gallagher 7, Dano Gallagher 7, and then on Facebook I'm just simply Danny Gallagher. I'm not on Instagram or anything else.
No. Real lightning round of names here, just to throw them out here. Fellow Dan Expos. Dan Schatzeder, 1977 to 80, relief pitcher, is that right?
That's right, yeah.
Dan Warthen, 1975 and 76. Dan Smith, 99 to 01. And I've got a Dan McGinn, the inaugural season, 69 through the 72 season.
Yeah, that's pretty good. If you ever like to, a guy like Dan Schatzeder is really good to talk. If you ever want to talk to him, let me know.
I'm glad you asked, because I figured I might ask you for recommendations, because I've tried.
Exactly. Anytime, Dan.
Some of these guys.
I've never been able to get hold of Dan Warthen.
No.
No.
Yeah, the ball players that I've been able to get, it's really difficult for me and at my perch to go through a Major League Baseball team to talk to an active player. But if it's a retired player, I've found one of my guests on LinkedIn, found another one, just dug up an email address online. I have tried the snail mail. I got one. It was the Kentucky Derby winner, not a baseball guy, but the jockey for a Kentucky Derby winner through snail mail. So I'm reading your book, and I can appreciate how resourceful you must be to get in touch with these guys.
Or anytime, Dan, I can help you with Schatz. His nickname is Schatz.
Okay, well,
it's always been nice for books. Dan Schatzeder, I text him or talk to him. He's just super.
I'd love to have him on the show. I appreciate that, Danny.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, folks, check him out. If you go on YouTube and if you listen to other podcasts, if you're on Spotify or Apple, you can probably find some of these. But Danny has appeared on the Bookshelf Conversations. He's been on Judgment Calls, Great Canadian Sports Show. He's been on Expos Hidden Stories, Stay Home with Saber. That's the Society for American Baseball Research. And Good Seats still available, and probably some more. But what a treat today. Was really looking forward to this, Danny, and you did not disappoint. So thank you for tolerating my rambling nature. I'm working on it. It's a work in progress, but I've had such a great time talking with you today.
Yeah, look, thanks again, Dan. Anytime. It's just been so much fun today.
Wonderful. Well, folks, that's it for this episode of Dan Time. Thanks for listening. Tell a friend about it. And follow Danny Gallagher and check out, get started with any of these books. But I really like the explosion here. One thing we didn't talk about on the back of the book, and we'll just save this for you, the listener, to learn more about. But there is, you may not know, a Tom Brady connection to the Expos. But it's just packed with just excellent stories for you or your baseball fan friends. So have a great rest of the week, and let's see those Spos back in. There's always hope. Hope springs eternal. So let's see those Spos in action again. May take another 10 or 20 years, but
okay, Dan. Yeah.
Thank you, Danny. Take care. Thanks for being on the show today.